Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm Jamie Cairns. I'm the SVP of Channel and Alliances at Fluent. I'm joined today by Carole Kingsbury, who's the Head of Business Solutions at Ted Baker. Hi, Carole.
Hi, morning, Jamie.
So today, a conversation around something that I know you're super interested in and I've spent a career becoming incredibly knowledgeable about. We're going to talk a little bit about data, how much data is being created, stored, and hopefully used in retailers and brands throughout the consumer's buying cycle and so forth. So in particular, as it pertains to AI and ML and how folks can get their data ready for those paradigms. So maybe we'll start off, if I can ask you a question about how you best define AI and ML. It's just a black box that spits out awesome answers, isn't it?
Absolutely, every time it's that simple. So I guess AI and ML, you either love it or you hate it, and I don't think anyone really truly understands it. But in essence, it's trying to get those lovely things called systems and solutions and machines to take a little bit of the weight and strain off the day-to-day. So to try to take some of the more simple processes as a starting point and to automate those using data, driven by data, helped and coached by humans, of course, so that us humans can concentrate on some of the more interesting bits, some of the things that really require us to kind of apply that human element to it, to kind of, see patterns in the data. So that's kind of my view. I think it is also very much in our world the thing that everybody clings to at the moment. So there's AI and ML with chips at the moment when it comes to implementing systems and solutions. It's kind of the latest kind of buzzwords and things that we must have in our world. But it is intrinsically not always about the smart maths and the clever solutions, but it is all about the data that you put into those systems.
So in your experience, when folks who are looking to embark on a journey or to adopt technologies in the AI or ML space, one thing we've spoken about before is the preparation of the data. And in particular, the stuff you told me about was about the data, but also the systems and the governance around that. Could you expand on that a little bit, please?
Sure. So data is it is the most important thing that an organization owns, apart from its people, of course. The use of data, however, is quite often a bit hit and miss. Data is just something that exists, surely, and it's just something that we need to enter into systems to do our jobs. However, with the kind of the rise or the increase in use of clever maths, AI, ML, the data that we put in becomes more important to be as clean and as good quality as possible. And that means all the data that we capture in our organization, for example, in retail. So every little bit of information we capture about customers, their preferences, their order history, and how we kind of crunch all those numbers together to give us a fighting chance at predicting trends, knowing where to put stock, ideally, so that we can get maximum sales, and also making sure that we maximize our profit. But intrinsically, at the end of the day, humans are involved in the process, and it's really difficult sometimes to get across to people the importance of the data that they manage on a day-to-day basis. So data governance is a real killer. A great example that I know a lot of retailers are experiencing at the moment and have done for a little while is the joy of the commodity code, particularly from a fashion point of view at the moment, how we identify the garments that we kind of push through our supply chain. And ultimately now, the fact that without that information, garments and kind of stock can't move through the supply chain because it's a requirement when it meets borders to be correct and factual. And it also means that we pay the right taxes. So we have found increasingly that a lot of kind of data and attributes of data are becoming more and more important to be able to run a business, but also more important in order for us to continue to run the business as we have to capture more information to become more accurate, to become a bit leaner and more focused and targeted. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's down to people to enter that information on systems.
Interesting that point about the commodity codes. And one thing that we've been sort of wrangling with, and I know the Mark Alliance are looking at in some detail, is around this notion of kind of standardization. both of means of interoperability between systems, because as you alluded to, we're collecting data from all over the place, and those different types of data are probably coming from different systems in a lot of cases. Is that something you've looked at, the challenge of formatting of data and systems talking to each other in order to collect that in a meaningful way?
Every day. So in some respects, the ability to get systems to talk to each other is quite often the easy bit. Figuring out the best place to source your data from for consistency and quality and provenance, and the processes and governance to apply to that to make sure it remains good quality, clean data is often the most difficult bit. That kind of human interaction piece is fundamental, and getting people to understand why they need to do these things and how important it is, and that whole educational kind of business change and culture shift is huge. And with any project or program that anybody would ever run in this world that focuses around data, it's intrinsically trying to get people to understand why you're doing these things, the objectives, and ultimately kind of what's in it for them, to make sure that they can give you what you need and help and support that process to get the best data possible, and effectively help those objectives be achieved.
Excellent. It's interesting for me sometimes to have a look. My career has spanned a couple of different industries. Are there things that you've seen, outside of retail that could potentially help within retail? Disciplines or approaches to data that, maybe in more regulated industries or something like that you've come across?
Yeah, I think that the kind of the regulatory aspects of things are quite key. There's always got to be a reason to have some level of conformity and uniformity. So, at school uniform. In some other industries like telcos, energy is another one. There are standard processes for exchanging data, because there have to be. There's the interoperability element, largely driven by breaking up monopolies and making sure that data becomes fair in the exchange of data, and the movement of people and ultimately money between organizations is better distributed. There is, within the retail space, we do use a lot of kind of standard formats, particularly EDI. It's still around, it's pretty old tech, but it does still keep goods moving, and is a way for retailers to talk to each other. Particularly in a kind of dropship context where you're just supplying goods to a third party, you've got no physical presence, you don't own the customer, but you do definitely, participate in the order fulfillment elements. There is, even within retail, there is a standard data model, much as there is in telco and electricity, gas, general energy industry areas. Not particularly well used. It is quite complex. It looks a bit of a beast. And it is ultimately down to the maturity of the organizations within retail kind of running or trying to run and make use of those standard frameworks and models. I often kind of wonder why we don't perhaps collaborate as much as we should in other industries or do in other industries. And within retail, I think it's entirely down to every retailer thinks they've got the secret sauce, and there is a commercial element, obviously, to kind of guard against there. But there are definitely moves within other areas. So banking has got an open banking collaboration. So it's now easy to switch bank accounts, much as it was with mobile numbers in telcos. And similarly, there is the Open Data Institute, which is a not-for-profit organization, which is looking at trying to, dare I say the word, democratize data and kind of share across and between a number of industries. Particularly at the moment, they seem to be focusing on the energy problem and the fact that now we're using electricity for everything, cars and all sorts, that we're going to have a bit of an energy problem in terms of trying to make sure that capacity meets demand. So they're trying to look at ways to open up data to a wider group so that they can get more data points to help energy companies effectively provide that capacity in the future.
That's pretty interesting that there are already forming some standards, and there are some existing data models that folks can look into and take advantage of themselves. Maybe specifically within a retailer, that there's, for every piece of excitement or hope there is in the benefits of AI and ML, I seem to hear fear from folks that it's going to take their jobs away or it's going to automate everything, and folks don't really understand how that works. Within retailers that you've experienced or that you're aware of, what kind of processes can folks go through to get buy-in, particularly from non-technical folks, around the benefits or how to approach projects and outline the business cases for these technologies?
I think it's the difficult bit of the process. It's getting everybody on board the bus before you set off on the journey of delivery. It's intrinsically, humans are motivated by understanding, and they're motivated by reward in some way, shape or form. So there's always got to be something in it for them. They've got to see the positives, and the positives particularly for them. So you're absolutely right. There's the constant kind of machines are taking away my job, and to some extent they do. It can't be denied. So if we think about kind of automated packing facilities in kind of distribution centres, they have taken jobs away from humans who are packing. Not all, but some. And whilst there is efficiency in that, there's also a massive capital investment that has to happen. But then there are different jobs that do appear in terms of managing those things that have replaced those fairly repetitive tasks that can be fully automated with very few problems. So putting together a business case for some level of automation. So for example, implementing a demand forecasting, demand planning tool. The positives about putting some of those tools in are that the kind of the day-to-day tweaking, almost the manual assessment with a myriad of spreadsheets and an army of allocators trying to understand where to put stock, becomes a lot simpler over time. So with good quality data inputs, good understanding, clear processes, and very clear roles and responsibilities for people, that process becomes automated. The assignment of orders to various locations becomes automated, and the role of the human in that process then is to look at that information and to make sure that actually with all the inputs that information is correct, and then over time effectively to step away and start to trust that the rules that have been put in place, that the data that's being cleansed and is being looked at by the human for any kind of funnies, any outliers, is used by the machine, by the solution, and then they can start to go and do different activities. So things that require that human element to apply a little bit of emotion to things potentially, to look for different patterns, and then again, when more patterns can be found, to feed those back into the machine and teach it something new. So in essence, in some respects, that solution, that machine should become part of the team. It's just doing some of the more boring, mundane, repetitive tasks.
It sounds like offloading some of the science of the role to the machine and taking on more of the art as the human, which sounds like more fulfilling and more enjoyable work, actually, even if it comes with some trepidation to start with. Yeah. So you talk a little bit about trusting the machine. So you can't just switch one of these on and it works, right? What kind of a journey do you go on?
Having kind of worked with some demand planning systems before that are a black box, so you talked about black boxes earlier, some company cultures love a black box because it means that they are fully trusting the maths and they're just going to look at the numbers when they come out. That's quite a rare beast in an organization for that level of trust to be there, or abdication, depending on your perspective. The trust element is really, for me, intrinsically about an organization understanding its processes, understanding its kind of objectives, and understanding its data. With that level of knowledge comes trust over time, as you start to see that the number that you're expecting to come out comes out, or if the number doesn't come out, that you can, with your knowledge of how it's made up, start to unpick it and perhaps challenge your own perceptions of what you think is correct. So sometimes solutions can give us different perspectives.
It's not unlike lots of other journeys we go on as humans. You start off trying to figure your way, figuring out the map, and you evolve your journey over time. You get more confident with how it works. You start to move a bit faster. You can start to make decisions a little bit more intuitively, and you can get quite creative and really then start to enjoy the journey and make the most of it. So within retail, this can seem, as we spoke about, it can seem like, a lot of business change, a lot of cultural change, adoption of new technology. All of these things come with a cost and a potential barrier. Are there particularly high value areas of data that you think could benefit from AI and ML processing? Are there smaller bite-sized chunks of projects that you think are really good candidates to look at? What's a good way to start?
I think other areas, so obviously demand planning we've talked about, to make sure that the goods are in the right location. It's always a good start. I think there's also good areas around kind of capacity and network planning when it comes to things like distribution and supply chain. The kind of the key one that I guess sits with the heart of any retailer is anything to do with customer data. So any of those interaction touch points, however small they might be, whether it's in store or online, and trying to piece together that view of who your customer is. Ultimately, store colleagues see customers come in every day, all shapes, all sizes, but that digital footprint of a customer and how they are interacting with your organization and what they're valuing and what they're not valuing is that kind of that nirvana to be able to pull out those personas, to be able to then construct stories and marketing and products around them so that you are adapting to the needs of your customers. You are almost second guessing what you think they're going to be wanting next, because ultimately you need to keep them keen, you need to keep them focused on your brand, you need to keep them shopping. It's that kind of addictive shopping retail behavior that every retailer is trying to get their customers to kind of continue to do. With kind of grocery, it's because you need it, but there's very much a kind of a brand or product alliance there that a customer has an affinity. Fashion is a little bit more personal, but again, it's about trying to capture as much data as possible about your customers so that you can keep them informed and keep them interested.
I think that notion of the customer is a really important one. I remember not too long ago being fairly deep in personalization technologies and looking at how people are essentially pigeonholed or put into groups or communities, and it really lost the essence of context a lot of the time. And I think that's where the mass of data, if you are able to tap into all of the things, all of the interactions, all of the demonstrations of intent that customers have, you can really optimize lots of areas. One area, for example, that we look at, I'll go back to something you said about the demand planning and forecasting, is historically these systems have looked at purchase data or successful completed transaction data to influence where demand was coming from. But actually, with online being combined with offline data and looking at what folks' intent is, looking at what they're searching for, where they're requesting delivery options, fulfillment options, looking at how fulfillment plans might be created, I think adds a really nice extra dynamic into how you can look at forecasting. That's certainly something that when we speak to some of the analysts, they're hearing and seems to be very interesting. So it's again more data that needs to be managed, and that outcome that's being sought needs to be understood up front, because when I'm building my website and I'm tracking the information, need to know what it's going to be used for, presumably, in order for it to be useful.
Yes, it's that very much that kind of end-to-end experience that you're trying to kind of capture. So, as you said, if a customer, when they purchase and kind of how they purchase and how they choose to be fulfilled in terms of, do I want it now? It has to be next day kind of a purchaser, or am I not bothered as long as it gets to me within a certain time frame? Am I more concerned about carbon footprint? So would I like it delivered from the nearest place that it can be delivered to me that minimizes that impact? I think the important bit as well is to understand kind of where a customer's journey starts, because quite often, it can start days or weeks before they purchase, depending on what they're purchasing. So quite often, the bigger the investment, the longer it will take people to actually make that decision, unless they're lucky enough to have massive amounts of disposable income, of course. But those kind of various touch points to try and build the story of kind of customer behavior, to help you to drive different behaviors potentially, or retrain your customer to shop in a different way that's easier for you potentially. So that kind of massive data and trying to crunch it all together and to try and piece together that jigsaw of that human effectively that is kind of interacting with your organization is hugely important, and still not quite, I think, there in terms of we can definitely do better.
No, we're fairly close to time. I wondered if there was any final thoughts that you wanted to add from your experience. You've been really very open and sharing about your experiences and your views on data. But is there anything that I've missed that I haven't asked you about that you think is important for everybody?
I think there's nothing specifically missed, Jamie, but I think it is really just to stress that kind of piece around, however clever the machines and however brilliant the maths that goes into making them, it's intrinsically about the data and the people that kind of shape what that solution is going to look like. Both that initial journey of kind of getting their organization, their people on board to kind of get behind implementing something new, taking it on the journey all the way through, to make sure that when that solution does kind of go live on day one, that everybody knows exactly the part that they need to play and the importance and the objectives of that solution. I think it's also then about not forgetting that just because it's in, it's done, it's kind of almost never finished, particularly with data. As your data points change and you might want to add more data in or tweak what you've got, it's that kind of constant learning which ultimately drives the best out of any form of kind of AI or ML solution, because you're constantly kind of correcting it and training it and tweaking it. It's kind of a living, breathing thing, for kind of want of a better way of describing it. And I think that's the important bit about you kind of have to give it good, clean information to start with, and then you have to keep training it and keep cleaning it and keep checking that it's okay, that it's still delivering against the objectives, lest things go wrong. Things can, be derailed by occasional bits of rubbish data going in. So it's that constant evolution and that constant need to keep training it, keeping tabs on it, making sure that it's healthy and happy and it's growing in line with what you expect it to do.
Well, I'm not going to steal the analogy, but I think you just described a child. I think that was your your description last time we spoke.
Possibly.
And I think it's true. I mean, as some of you may have heard, my child screaming in the background. I think I need to work on the data that I'm providing my child and the input. I'll take responsibility for the management and the improvement of that. And who knows, I might get some better results out. Carole, it's been really nice talking to you again. I've learned loads since we've started discussing data, so I'm really grateful for your time. I'm sure everybody else is as well, and hopefully they've learned something as well. If folks want to get in touch with you, is that okay? If they've got
Absolutely.
any questions for you,
Yep,
they can certainly come to us, but if they want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, so LinkedIn is always the best source of information for these kind of things. So yeah, any questions, do just drop me a message on LinkedIn.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Jamie.